Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CFO Summit, the Modern CFO's New Role and Responsibility. My name is Michael with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. And to ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We're excited to have Jill Chardusan and Dheeraj Chirian with us for a discussion titled CFOs and Digital Transformation. Jill and Dheeraj, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Michael. So, hi, Dheeraj. Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here.
So, talking about digital transformation today, maybe we'll get started with our first question, just to kick off our chat. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit about, how have you seen digital transformation journey in your organization? How far has it progressed?
Yeah, and I think, before we dive into the questions, maybe a little background about you would be nice, not just for them, also for me. It kind of, because the breadth of your, experience will also lay weight to every answer that we get, right, and back and forth.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for reminding me. So I've been with Mars Incorporated for 22 years. All within the finance function in a variety of roles. I'd say the last 4 years I've been supporting the digital function, and Mars has started its digital transformation journey about 4 years ago. So that's been the big area of focus for me and my team this year, is supporting that transformation agenda for Mars as we become a more digital organization. Yeah, so it's been quite an exciting ride.
Even with the sweet tooth, you gotta have digital, right, for everything.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think similar to you, while I'm not, with dealing with one particular company as such, but I drive a lot of digital transformation. I've done that through much of my career. I remember way back when, in the early 90s, that's, when I started my career and went into finance, and that was a time when systems, software was just coming to the fore, and it's like buying the latest CDs. I went and got a master's in information systems. So it's not so much to do with finance, but it has everything to do with how I drive finance in the longer run. So, since then, I've seen a lot of changes. Earliest on was when you remember the old Nokia phones, and only the IT directors had the access to their mainframes from that, and we thought that was cool. And things have changed so much today, right? So, yeah. So, what was the question that you had? You wanted to ask me?
Well, you've kind of kickstarted it. So it sounds like your journey started in the 90s. It reminded me actually of Y2K. Remember that? That was the big thing in the 90s.
We waited. It was like, the countdown was not for New Year's, but for Y2K.
It was, yes. Yes, it was. And now here we are. It's hard to believe that's nearly 30 years later. So it was more in relation to digital transformation and where you've seen the organizations as of recently progress on digital transformation journeys.
They have been moving faster now. So it's not, some of it is design. I mean, there has been some heavy changes that have happened over time. Remember the old Skype when we used to use that? Pretty patchy. We went with this WebEx. We had Yammer, if you know. That was one platform I never really got onto. There was a lot of push for it. So things have moved along, but nothing pushed us to see the change and make the change as much as these past few years. where you were forced to separate ourselves from, real-time communication, face-to-face communication. And that brought companies, organizations, open their eyes, really needing to make those changes, right? And some of them had to do it fast. Others were on their way, so still stumbling along. Others already had it in place, so they had to change technology. So there was a lot of things going on through that digital transformation. I'd say some of the biggest areas was mostly in communication, not so much in processing or process automation. That was there. Those who were on the bandwagon, those who weren't, right? But then really communication took main stage when you just couldn't see people and you couldn't interact with them, and the anxiety of team members really needing to know that they're seen, heard, but not being all the time on it. It brought its own problems along with it, right? But that was there. I remember many of my roles were either global or regional. So I always used to tell my team, I'm almost 90 to 95% remote, because the 5% who see me that day in that office are the ones live. Everyone else is on video or phone or chat, and that's pretty much what you get. So you kind of get used to it. That does not mean that everybody, including vendors and customers, had to be on that. So had some getting used to. And it depends on where you are, which countries you work with, which industry you work with. Some of them you can't even use technology simply because of the need for cybersecurity and defense protocols and things like that. You don't determine that, others do. How was it for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned Mars. We've been on a digital transformation journey, and it's kind of interesting because, to your point, it's making me reflect on how there's kind of always been a bit of a digital transformation behind the scenes. Going back to the 90s, the technology is always changing. It's been enhanced at Mars over the past 4 years to really accelerate, I would say, and become more of a digital organization. And so we started with a hyper focus on digital or data foundations, and just ensuring that our master data was clean and usable. The introduction of a data lake as well. So that started probably to start 4 years ago. And we've been infusing the data lake with more and more information. And then it migrated into, now that the data is there, we can actually use it. And so it's migrated into, upgraded applications and data science and data analytics. And we're starting to see the benefits of some of these new ways of working in the organization, whether it be from strategic revenue management to commodity analytics, predictive insights, scenario planning. So it's been fascinating to see how things are starting to change and really just move at a faster pace because of the digital tools that we've implemented.
Yeah, and you bring good points there, especially and for finance. I mean, I would argue that finance is pretty much on the forefront of a lot of this, because you talk about the data lake. And that was not too long ago. I'd say about 5 years ago that we put all that in place, and I actually used to, in some humor, call it the data swamp.
Yes.
Especially once it gets in there, and if it's not vetted and the master data is not held to a certain standard, and we didn't know what was happening upstream, it just pools at finance. And then what do you do with it? It's kind of late to unravel things at that point in time.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
It can get out of hand when it starts. It seems to move very quickly.
Yes,
for sure. So perhaps you could talk about how you've seen digital transformation improve maybe some traditional processes for the finance function in particular.
Sure. Let's talk about finance, and then maybe I can give a little color on how that has also changed for other processes and functions that help us in finance all the time. So for me, it's master data, right? I mean, for as far as back as I know, master data has been important. And getting that right, being able to audit your processes is very important. To understand, to be able to drill down into information is critical, right? I mean, so how do we create that culture, not just among ourselves in the finance team, but also upstream, whether it's at the warehouse, whether it's at the production line, whether it's in sales, anyone has to create a level of data. And given they are so disparate, HR information is different from sales information, from SKUs. You got to find a balance where they all talk at that same level of knowledge and getting everybody to do that work. So it's a culture, right? I mean, and it took time initially, and it still is. Finance, it gets, how do we say, it gets thrown to us over the fence. But the important thing is ensuring that there is some self-help happening. They do some of the work up front. Now, of course, when you are busy selling, you're busy fighting fires on the supply chain. That doesn't seem to be critical because you're going to get product to the shelves, product to the customer, answer other things. But at the same time, all this information is here, and we in management expect, answers, stories, analysis, and it's not easily forthcoming because how do we go back and, as I said, unravel all of this and get that information? So that's been a little bit of a difficulty. So I think much of the changes that happened in speed of computing, getting stuff on the cloud, bringing newer dashboards for analysis was also the culture, educating our colleagues in other functions in manufacturing, production, sales, to understand what we see and what we don't see. And making that shift of slowly, you can't suddenly say, hey, you know what, there's about 40,000 transactions. I want you to now separate each one of them and give it to me by the end of the week. That's what we do. But they may not have the time, and they really think it's not their work. But once it's inculcated in there, and we help them. So we in finance, or I'm sure many in the audience would have seen it as well, is that you start to see that finance is out there saying, hey, we did it this way. We can help you, identify what needs to be separated or put together so we can see it differently at our end. And collectively, we're going to save time for you, for us, and everyone else, and data will be faster. And we can, and part of it is also the functions upstream being able to use our own information or the financial information back for their own purposes. So they can strip the dollars and use the SKU information or the volume information, or they can use it for demand information, or use the dollars to know, what did I pay the last time to this vendor? How much did I buy from them? How do I leverage? The purchasing team can say, well, I have so much that I procured, I'm going to renegotiate something, right? So there is that give and take that happens all the time. As we also talked about, along with that was more information coming in. Companies to become, and I won't say that for Mars. Mars is so many units of every SKU, but at the same time, there's volumes happening, right? Everything from chocolate to sugar to packaging to printing and everything else. But at the same time, in my case, it could be industrial products, and some of them had to be tagged and monitored through blockchain throughout, because these are safety products. When I was investing, I was with Nuclear. So you can't lose a product, and you can't miss out on what that quality was through each stage, because they'll take make you take it apart
Mhm.
for billions of dollars so that they can make sure it works correctly. It's a safety
Mm.
issue.
Mhm.
So, being able to track all of that and the regulation required for everything, right? I mean, even if there's a mistake, you need to know that you did something consistently and you have the information for it. So
Mhm.
all of this together has made certain scenarios where you have to improve how you do it. And it's, technology, it's there.
Yeah.
All the makings are there, the tools are there. Unfortunately, nobody tells you, oh, this tool, they all tell you the tool is great.
Mm.
And there is nice sample data. That's like airbrushing a picture, right? But in reality, how you get it to work for you is important. And
Mhm.
grounding management in that is also important, because you can't just say, management say, oh, that's great, I can just push a button and get it. But there's a lot of footwork prior to that. It's a lot of
Yeah.
retraining of people. There's a lot of, or a lot less expectation should be there of someone rushing to you with the piece of paper at an odd date when data is not in there, and
Mhm.
making sure everyone puts in the data regularly. Otherwise, you get it at the end of the month, right? So
Mhm.
all these, that's what I meant by, process culture. That culture of doing things differently is important.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I have seen, in particular, we've moved to a lot more self-service tools as well at Mars, which has completely changed our process and the roles that the finance organization takes, because we no longer have to spend the time on gathering all the data
Mhm.
manually. It's more readily available, to your point. And so it's almost shifted the role in the business partnership that we've been able to play in terms of driving the organization forward.
Yeah.
So it's been a key enabler to changing for the better a lot of finance processes at Mars. And along that goes with it, to your point on the culture, it's different, right? So now you have a different set of capability, a different skill set, that we're asking of our finance associates. And that initial shift is a little bit adjusting.
Mhm.
But then
Yes.
as they start to see the value, it seems to snowball and things seem to move a lot quicker. And then it almost sets it off into a once you get started and you start seeing the value, it starts to spread even more to more processes and more opportunities. At
Yeah,
least,
everyone wants to see that there is a win, there is a respite,
yeah,
not just let's keep changing, but the change never catches and there's a new change happening next. It can tire people mentally.
yeah, for sure, for sure. So perhaps moving on. So where have you seen, how do you determine, you've got quite a lot of experience with digital transformation. In your experience, how do you determine what are the right tools and technologies to bring into your organization?
I always, so here's a few things on not just the tools, but also what you need to sort of foster.
Mm,
A good relationship with both the operations
mm,
group as well as your IT group, and ensuring operations is telling you what are things that are critical, not nice to have. There are 1,000 nice to have. We can do it all, right?
mm,
And what can we as finance do for them? We can definitely put analysts in the field, right? So they can bring a lot of value to it and they can provide information, they can set expectations. On the IT side, they can look at potential tools based on, so each of us are, interviewing and asking each other, what do you need? What do we
mhm,
have? Where do we want to go? Right? It's a circular thing. And so you
mm,
keep going through that and you come up with things. Now, one of the things I've kind of hardened myself to is there are a lot of interesting toys out there,
mm,
but you have, and they're important. You got to know them, not in much detail, but you got to know what they do, and see, is that what you need in your company?
mhm,
It's not like, I have the latest iPhone 14 Pro, so let's talk about it at the next party.
Mhm,
Well, it takes a lot to be able to talk about it because you need to make it work,
mhm,
right? And once you say, yes, I'll put it in, there are expectations both of improvement in process, improvement in capabilities of our associates, the data or the analysis that comes out, savings, everything, right? You got to get a good ROI on it. So, and you don't look at just yourself, meaning your own organization. You got to look at your, uh, entire, um, work chain and
mhm,
see your vendors, your customers, and you. So if your vendors can provide digital information into your system for that tool, and what you generate can't be provided in a digital form to your customers or in some form that is valuable to them, you're not generating value. Just doing it in your own, let's say, in your pond and ignoring the entire ecosystem means you are putting a lot of effort that, may be useful or will be useful someday, but you have to have a lot of converts to come into it. I'll give you an example. If you know of the SAP Ariba system, which is accounts payable, but at the same time, they also have a lot of contracting in there. We got onto it back in, was it 2002, but there was still not SAP, but we had SAP system. But the marketplace was what they had touted and said, yeah, this is going to be great. But we got onto it. There were very few vendors who were using that as a marketplace, meaning
mm,
we can't do a lot of electronic invoicing and purchasing. At the same time, many of those vendors are not relevant to our industry, which means you reduce the total population you can deal with. It's over time. Today, there are more that you can
mm,
work with. You got to look at that around the curve. So 2 years from now, once I get comfortable with it, can I use it, right?
mhm,
Not 5 years from now. But at
mhm,
the same time, are others on board? Are they using it? So it becomes even more synergetic and valuable for everybody, not
mm,
just, I got to use it. Same thing with blockchain.
mm,
Everyone wanted blockchain. Well, how often can you use it unless you have a billion units with similar values going through? You don't use blockchain.
mhm.
It's hard to track everything. And
Yeah.
even if you had a billion units go through, are your scanners, your production lines scanning everything and giving unique barcodes to everything? No, it's for batches. How do you track those?
Yeah.
Right. So those are important, and the cost to implement. And again, as I mentioned, it's very important that your team, our teams, and our management colleagues see that it's becoming effective. It's being implemented. Yes, there's always going to be hiccups. I really don't care with that. But have we taken a hard look at it, and is it being implemented before we start moving on to something else? And almost never should you stop a project midstream unless it was too heavy in cost and it was a huge error,
Mm,
not because you saw something shinier and you move
mm,
on to that. You do that, you lose all credibility, especially with your team,
mm,
uh, who has to put it in place and use it. You're not the one to use it. You just push a button. I still think I push a button and it's all there,
mm,
but that's not the case, right? So it's important to look at all of that together. But again, communication tools, analysis tools, having the right levels of smart data that comes from outside, not just your internally generated data off of your production line or sales and others, but also open library of information, anything from your stores, space that's being used, demographics, who's buying, say, the chocolate that you
mhm,
have, right? Where is it being, how much of it is being consumed? What's the demand? Where is it not selling as fast? All that is important as much as, because you look at logistics and you'll say, well, I'm not going to send a whole truckload there. I'll send it here because there's more demand. But you
mhm.
can automate it and you have value for it.
Yeah, for sure. It's so true in terms of staying the course, and sometimes these implementations, they will have bumps along the way. Um, tell me about, I'm curious, what do you do when one fails?
You have to learn from it. You have to learn quickly. You have spent money on it. You better learn something from it.
Yeah.
There's value in it. There is something you learn from it. And that is probably the best, I'd say medicine or panacea for moving on to what you need to do.
Yeah.
Take a break. Don't start on the next one immediately. Just spend time learning from it. What could have been done better? And don't isolate it just to your own team. You have to have operations, you have to have management, you have to have, IT, everyone look at it together and say, what could have been done better, not what went wrong. Or why couldn't it have, been successful? Because, and everything, you can't think of everything, but when you learn something, I always tell my team, and we have accountants, but even then I tell them, fail, but fail fast and just move on.
Yeah, it's so true. And to that end, how do you know, right? Because you'll never get perfection out of the box.
Yes.
So when
don't
do you
polish
make
that rock? Don't polish
Right.
that rock. This is where you
Right.
take a page from IT and set you usually have a set of milestones and you have a version control. You know what you want, be done with it. Everyone will try to oversell and sell you more and say, well, if you did this tweak, it'll even be better. The point is, you don't even know the old tweak will work correctly. You haven't tested it. You're on new ground. You're in new waters. You have to know that first before you go, unless there was a problem with the original spec and then you had to make some minor changes, right? So it's very important. Very important that also having a good steering team, a good champion for it. The champion doesn't come there and say, you got to make this tweak and that change. They usually will be a good, lighthouse, say, this is where we want to go. We're not moving from it, right? And continue to give confidence to the team. And that could be anyone, right? I mean, the CFO, if you're starting from the financial perspective, or a COO. I've done it by myself. I've done it with the COO. Sometimes you have us as the steering or the ones who sponsor it, but then immediately below that, there's a steering team where we also participate, but wear a different hat, and that will have a few more people on it. And it's our accountability and it's our responsibility to ensure that people feel confident that we're not leading them on a chase. And when something goes wrong, no one's being told that it's anyone's fault, but how fast do we move and how fast do we move as a team? Not just, oh, it's a finance section, nobody else needs to look at it. Well, the data flows from everywhere. Who all needs to be part of that, right? That's going to be pretty critical.
Yeah, for sure. We have a series of questions in the chat window. Perhaps maybe we could take a few.
Sure.
I think some of them have been relevant along the way, but might be a bit easier to answer. Series. So question number 1, isn't the bulk of digital transformation simply a move to the cloud?
No. No,
I don't think so
immediately
either.
tell you that it's not
Yeah.
digital transformation. Remember, talk about transformation, right? I mean, we talk digital. Yes, it has tools, it has software, it has, but a lot of it is also. Let me put this word out there. It's called OD, organizational transformation. So when you digitize certain things, you're also changing mindsets of people, being able to do more, giving them skills, tools, and that's important. But it's also, doing things differently and bringing others on for the ride, getting them on the bus. And I don't mean just our teams. It's difficult enough. I understand that, but you also got to do that with your vendors. I mean, some cases you can't do anything. If you are, a small mom and pop store who has a key technology, but and they don't want to change, they don't want to change. You're not going to get them to do that. either they'll say, well, buy it or go on your merry way, right? Whereas others are willing to do that, and you have some sharing of synergies and costs and things like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think the cloud is definitely a major enabler to transformation, but I also think it's just the start. So there's
Yeah.
tools, there's automated processes, and to your point, that the change of the culture of the organization, and even for some corporations, your consumers as well, who
And the cloud should be
Yeah.
invisible to us for the
Correct.
most part, right?
Right.
I mean, it enables, it does a lot. IT should find it really easy to support vast amounts of data. Remember, I learned something interesting with our engineering teams. Oh, you can put, petabytes, so which is thousands of terabytes of information onto the cloud. That's the easy and cheap part. It's when you start to download that, they charge you.
Mm-hmm.
So learn not to put everything in garbage on the cloud.
Mm-hmm. True. Very true. It's like the pictures on your iPhone. As soon as the cloud came, I look at mine.
You're
I
paying
think
99
I
cents
have
for additional data space when
right.
really it's all irrelevant, 15 frames of the same thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's convenience, and you got to live with that.
Yeah. Question number 2, won't most accountants or finance folks need much broader IT coding platform experience going forward?
No, but it's interesting because a lot of these, the work that an accountant can do, they will be taught to be super users, but they should never be taught to learn code. For one, it's a security issue.
Mm-hmm.
You post the entries, you shouldn't know how to code and change anything at the back end. Second, it's not your role. I mean, there are other people who can do it. Of course, learning what a screen does or what a function does is important, because now you can be a super user. You can tell them, well, you can go through these menus and do something, but you shouldn't have to learn to code.
No, I don't think it's a necessity around coding. I think there's some opportunities for easy code platforms like Power Automate and things like that, where it can be an asset for a finance.
Yeah, you can do that.
Sure.
So these are tools. So being able to navigate tools is different from coding.
Agree.
I didn't mean to say that they had to learn everything or unlearn certain things.
Yeah.
Of course, you learning to use certain functions at a high level. It's like Excel, right?
Right.
Writing a small formula is still not code, but yeah, that makes them valuable. Yes.
Yeah. Question number 3, aren't there pretty big risks to moving everything to the cloud?
Well, we used to think so, and there still may be. There are several industries that won't do it. They have their own private cloud or hybrid cloud, simply because of cybersecurity risks. But we've gotten over that. I mean, there are lots of tools. Some of the biggest ones are Google Cloud, AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. You have Microsoft, you have HP, everyone has those. And there hasn't been any more or less risk of hacking or people getting in there. The key is for the IS or the IT department to continuously audit those cloud systems. So there are those self-help audit platforms and dashboards that let you review what's happening in your cloud. The old cloud used to be located on the same cloud between more than one company. So you had to ensure that any change to the cloud for one customer did not impact yours. And that goes today for any software where they make any major changes, that it should not impact yours. But cloud has gotten more secure, and there's more visibility into what's on the cloud.
Yeah, I agree. The next question, number 4, do you feel like there is value lost in some process automation?
Value lost?
Value lost in process automation.
Yes, and I'm thankful for that, because certain things, that's why we call it a process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you automate it, it takes away things that we thought we had value in it. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if I say that, and I know my team in the past, it's kind of confused them, angered them, right? But the thing is, that's what you want to do with automation, is things that you do every day, right? You don't want to do that continuously, and it just becomes a cyclical activity. You're not on a production line that you stamp the same product, 1,500 times, and that's what your values. Your values more than that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the definition of value is the key. When you automate the process, you lose somebody going around it or the exceptions to it, which might seem valuable at the time, but down the line, I almost always seems to come back as an issue.
And just looking at that,
Yeah.
ask yourself the question, how much time is your team member or associate spending in the office every day? Do they go even 5 minutes over their 8 hours, right? Could that have been saved by some level of automation?
Yeah, absolutely. The next question, this is interesting. So how has planning changed pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic?
Well, I'd like to hear your perspective as well. But, for me, pre-pandemic, everything was there, right? I mean, we did a lot of advanced preparation. We would look at all our business structures, any M&A we need to do, where we want to sell, where we had failures. We look at those too when we do our planning. But post-pandemic, we still had to do a lot of that, but now we had to get into, I'd say, more detail on production, the operational stand-up time, and what it takes, where things are on the water, how fast is parts or material coming in, where are prices, how much of hedging is required before I can ensure, or how much more hedging need to be done before I can get products out. And and I think it's also an ongoing, evolution that I used to look at. We were in Panasonic Automotive. Well, we need to produce all these goods. I had to look at, study how the dealers are selling these particular vehicles. Are there even cars out there? What's the volumes? And then we go back and use our data and the customer data and talk to them and say, well, if you have you want 4,500 units of something, which means you're going to make 4,500 cars. But my unit is not the only one that goes in the car. There are about 3,000 other items that go to make up that car. Do you have everything? Or if you don't, then you probably have too much of a good, which in this stretched time where supply chain is bad, you look at it and say, well, you can actually save by not buying too much of a part when it's very expensive, or or air shipping it, simply because you perceive a need. But once we can agree with everyone in that supply chain, we can better manage it. Yeah. So that's the difference. So I mean, it's not exactly the total annual planning, but every small, and our plans now became the total year, the strat plan over 5 years, but at the same time, every few days was a plan, because everything you didn't have much views of what was out there 4 days later.
Yeah, I think in Mars in particular, we saw a shift with the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, I'd say we had our plan, we focused on our plan. We talked some scenario planning and risks to delivery. Post-pandemic, well, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, the need for scenario planning and alternate adjustments, and the need to be more agile significantly increased for sure. And that's the adjustment that we've seen. And actually, I think that also enhanced the need and the focus on the digital transformation being required, because the data lake, the availability of data, the modernization of tools enabled us to move much quicker than I think that we ever would have been able to before.
Which is really good that you're able to leverage it in time. In many cases, people want to get results or use it when it's half done.
Yeah.
And then there's disappointment or impatience that it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something one has to always watch out for.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe the next question here, what are 2 or 3 of the best indicators of ROI for a digital transformation effort?
Well, interesting, because as you go through it, you don't, you usually, calculate an ROI upfront as to what it wants it to be delivered, and you also look at the total cost. As long as costs are not going up, and you stay the course, you should expect to get that ROI. But you usually see that about a year in, not sooner.
Yeah.
At least something to measure by. It's really hard to do it. So I'd say the first thing you want to do is ensure there are no changes happening outside of your original plan to implement. The other, again, a return I'd look at is team members and management are still positive about what changes are being brought about. That's not a dollar value, but it's definitely an important one, because the other resources who would support it as well as do the work to make this successful.
Yeah. They're almost softer indicators of ROI than
But they're
harder.
much more powerful.
Yeah.
In that own sense.
And harder to measure for sure. For sure. So perhaps time for a couple of more before we reach the end. Let's see. Could you please share us the best practice related to digital transformation? Best practice.
Well, I could spout a few, but things are changing so fast. And every company's, you're all unique. Every situation is unique, but at the same time, you have some definite learnings from prior or historical implementations. Again, I would always say, once you have, your expectations, set your expectations just like you would on your revenue targets. You want to hit a certain number at the end of the year and tomorrow, right? End of next year. Don't go beyond that at this point in time, but enough to see that this system will deliver what it's supposed to do, not as of today, but as of 6 months after it's implemented. Try to imagine. You kind of have a picture of what things are changing. So make sure you do that, not what's today, because when you do that, today is shifted and something else comes up and suddenly you're trying to tweak or react or change out your entire implementation to meet that new requirement. So you're always short-sighted. Never do that. And it's important that you resource properly. That doesn't mean giving away 40% of an associate's time to the project, because that 40% doesn't remain 40%, because suddenly it becomes 90% there, you get 10%, and then I pull them back and say, no, 10% isn't enough at closing. So come back 110% here, and that lags. So it's important. I know it's difficult, headcount, everything, but it's good for the team member not to be pulled 3 ways. They learn something, they bring it back, and just separating it. If you want to bring in people towards that through rotation or from outside to train them temporarily, do that. But give them specific tasks and specific times to work with it.
Agree.
Communication. Communicate the hell out of it. Continue to do that. I mean, not just, oh, we have this problem, that, but here's where we are. Here's what we're doing. And oh, by the way, we've learned this, but we have had some things to learn further because we didn't anticipate this. People like that because it's open. People are always worried about what's happening. How is it impacting me? What am I going to do? Is my job at stake here?
Yeah.
You see 3 people rushing into a room, and then you stand outside and say, isn't that the place that's doing all these changes? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? So you want to make sure. I'm not talking about the end of the world, but you need to keep them updated.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I'd say the most critical thing that I have seen is the change management of it and the bringing along of the organization.
And the thing is, as long as you keep them, engaged and teach them to bring on it, sometimes you give them a little bit of a push or a nudge, but you do that because I have never lost a person because of a digital transformation. If nothing, I've made them about 3 times more valuable.
Agree.
Maybe not 10 times, but at least 3 times, because they know new things. They know how to analyze.
Right. It's a new skill set they've added.
Yes, it
to their
is.
repertoire.
And they're capable of it. They all think that, no, it's not me, I can't do it. But in their own way, with the tools at hand, they become capable analysts.
Yeah.
And it's just a way of doing it differently. And they're still them. We're not changing them. But it's just a way of doing things. And it's always been valuable because, again, over time, we're losing people, or we have more need for data and more short on time. And we need everyone on deck to be able to do more capable, and I'd say creative accountants kind of don't like that, but still it's important.
Yeah. And I think key to one of the things that I've seen really work at Mars is remembering that what's in it for everybody helps bring everyone along, and where those communications and change management has considered what's in it for everyone. It's gone a lot quicker, a lot smoother, and felt good every step of the way.
And it's live testing every day, right? When you're involved, you say, well, did you think of this? Oh, I didn't. You may have been part of the same team, but you may have missed it, and that's important.
Well, we're near the end of our time together. It's been a pleasure talking with you today, Dheeraj.
Thank you. Likewise.
And thanks to everyone on the call with some great questions in the chat window. So I hope you enjoyed it. I did as well.
And with that, I want to thank everyone else for joining us today for a fantastic session. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Now, this officially concludes the Argyle CFO Summit, the Modern CFO's New Role and Responsibilities. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Divi and Vertex. And thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.